Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
During the course of waxing political drama, and as far as our country and communities acutely struggle with policy and direction, it's human nature to find blame and to assign responsibility for a lack of direction, both politically or just in general. Well, it's the Republicans' fault. And it's the Democrats' fault. And according to Thomas Jefferson, it's also defective citizenship, or as he called it, not occupying the office of citizen. Thank you again for watching, and welcome to the most widely watched dialogue on Carolina business and public policy. I'm Chris William, and this time a roundtable of political journalists will join the discussion about our contemporary politics and policy. Please stay with us.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded October 4th, 2013. On this week's program, Adam Bean from The State, Tim Boyum of News 14 Carolina, Corey Hutchins of the Charleston City Paper, and Jim Morrill of the Charlotte Observer. And now, here's Chris William.
Hello, welcome to our program. And you know, we always do that before the cameras roll. We always go down these rabbit holes. Guys, welcome to the program. And let me say, in case I forget, thank you for traveling. Jim, not so much for you, because it's probably literally right around the corner, but coming from the Low Country and Columbia and the Triangle. You know, I want to start fairly broadly here, Jim, and I'd like to start with you. You know, this Thomas Jefferson idea about occupying the office of citizen. And let me read you something else. George Washington, in his farewell address, said many things, and you know, it was a short address, which was kind of nice. But he said, "I want to warn you in the most solemn manner against the baneful effects of the spirit of party." He said, "It is seen in its greatest rankness and is truly their worst enemy." And you know, we call it hyper-partisanship. How have we gotten to this point?
You know, George Washington called it factions, I think, back in the day, and he, like you said, he warned against it. And you know, I think in the last few years we've seen more and more splits. You know, everybody is in their own corner, their own silo, we have safe districts for members of Congress and the legislature, which really lock them into their own ideology more than ever. And you see that it's the same thing you see in the media. You know, the media is more fractured. You have people going to MSNBC or Fox. And so there's really a lack of middle ground, and I think that we're seeing that play out in Washington this week.
Aren't we going in the wrong direction here? Aren't we retreating, you know, to the baseline and not coming together? You know, I hate to be so kumbaya here, but it seems like we are throwing rocks at each other from the baseline. Anyone?
Yeah, well, I think it's people, like Jim said, people want to watch views that reinforce their own. They don't care about anybody else's. You know, that's where we see the Tea Party factions, and they just want their congressmen to do what they want them to do, and they don't care about anybody else.
Is that because, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Tim, but is that because the money flows to the extreme voices here?
Well, yeah, and Congress members and legislators are afraid to say anything that goes against it because they're afraid that they're not going to get that money. And let's face it, when the House of Representatives and the state legislature in North Carolina, they're up every 2 years, so you're running for election every 2 years.
Yeah, Adam?
Well, it certainly made political reporting a more delicate art form, for sure, because you have millions of dollars being spent on the message. And along comes this pesky reporter who's not following the script. And so it seems like part of the MO is if We get out there, we try to report what's going on. It's not, oh, let's debate the issues. Oh, let's attack this reporter. Let's discredit this reporter. He's biased. She's biased. And it certainly makes it difficult or more touchy, certainly, to be a political reporter these days.
You've got a good group, I think, here to talk about that. Reporters from South Carolina and North Carolina, 2 states that are essentially one-party states. North Carolina has kind of actually stolen our thunder, I think. South Carolina.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing, Corey?
It's a bad thing for people like me and Adam because South Carolina was the political circus, and we get a lot of attention every 4 years when the big presidential Republican primary comes through, but also you see South Carolina getting a lot of national news for what might be described as being a political circus, crazy bills coming out of the legislature, but now North Carolina's totally taken that away from us. And I think what we've seen in both states are they've become echo chambers for the party in power. And so it's kind of our job to try and pierce through that. But like Adam said, it's very tough when all they want to do is be on message, be on talking points.
In North Carolina, is there any sense among the Republican leadership that their brand has been hit that hard? You know, and Governor McCrory came out of the gate when he was elected talking about branding, rebranding North Carolina, making a good brand, for better or worse. But do they get the sense that what Corey said, Jim, that, you know, they've taken the baton away from South Carolina when it comes to pettiness in some ways?
You know, I don't think so. Maybe in McCrory's office to some extent, and Tim could talk about that. But I think the legislature is, you know, they're making their own brand. I mean, they're moving the state to the right. They're cutting taxes, they're cutting regulations. Those are the things that they care about, and they don't care what the New York Times says. If the New York Times editorializes that North Carolina's in decline, they don't care about that.
I think the legislature doesn't care, particularly the Senate. They fully believe in what they're doing, and they're going to move forward. I think the governor's office does care. They're responding to those editorials with replies in the New York Times. The governor has his 501c4 that he's affiliated with, is running a TV ad in the first 9 months of being in office. I mean, why else would you be running a TV ad to promote what you're doing?
Yeah. You know, how much responsibility does a citizen bear in this kind of dialogue? You know, again, Jefferson called it the office of the citizen. He called it defective citizenship. We all have seen the tepid doesn't even say it, dismal turnouts in primaries and even in general elections.
Well, you talked about money before, and money being a factor in moving people, polarizing people, but it's also the activists. I mean, the people who vote in primaries, you know, represent one wing of a party. I mean, you have the extreme wing in the Republican Party. You have, you know, people on the left in the Democratic Party who vote in primaries, and that really determines who gets elected anymore.
Is it just folly to think that we're going to be able to come together in some kind of reasonable dialogue?
I wouldn't think so. I mean, I certainly.
Where does it start, though, Adam?
Well, I think it would start with the citizens, like you said. It starts with citizenship, with people being educated, knowing what the issues are, and then showing up to these town hall meetings, showing up to the polls, and sending messages to their lawmakers that, look, we want you guys to work together, not, you know, shut things down. We want you guys to come together and solve problems.
I mean, you need the middle part of America, not in economic terms, but the largest part of America that doesn't take an active role to speak up. I mean, the factions of both sides are running it right now. Social media and the modern era and the internet has allowed them a voice, the factions, and they're very loud on Twitter, blogs, citizen journalists, and I think they're ruling the day publicly. So I think somehow you need to get the rest of America involved. And I don't know what the answer is to that.
People have to speak up. I mean, Chris, we're in Charlotte. We've had an election here a month ago, a city primary. Yeah, 6% of the voters turn out.
My point, Jim.
And even more on Mondays, you know, 5,000 people are showing up to this, but that's 5,000 people. North Carolina's a state of over 9 million people. So does that represent a majority of the state? I don't know.
It's also, of course, our job to write stories and produce broadcasts that explain it in a way that's digestible to the average person so they understand it, right? And I don't think that message is getting across, especially in North Carolina. I think we saw, you guys probably know the numbers better than I do, but what about that Elon poll that came out recently that showed that even though we've had this big, North Carolina had this giant election law that got all sorts of local and national attention, there was still a sizable chunk of the public that just didn't know much about it. Is that the reporter's fault? Is that the citizen's fault for not paying attention? Is it the politician's fault for maybe not characterizing it properly?
Corey, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, and I'm not interrupting. Just adding to this, there was Dallas Business Journal came out with a poll with a survey that said 30, and I think Jimmy Kimmel on his program made fun of this, but 36% of the people said that they did not like the Affordable Care Act.
Right.
47% said that they didn't like Obamacare.
Right.
I mean, this kind of stuff is crazy. So I guess we'll stay with you, Corey. So, what is your job now? It's obviously to report and make it clear, but how much? And let me take it. Let's use the ACA as an example. How many resources do you have in your job to say, 12 months, 16 months past ACA? We're going to do an in-depth to see how well it actually is working.
Sure. Well, luckily for me, I work for a weekly newspaper, an alternative weekly. I worked for the Free Times in Columbia, which is the alt weekly there for almost 4 years. And now I work for the Charleston City paper in Charleston. We come out once a week, which means that I don't have to be producing a story every day like a daily reporter like Adam does. I can actually take a month to report a story. And we will hopefully do that on the ACA. I was out actually talking to some folks the other day in the food and beverage industry. Charleston's a big hospitality crowd, and I was approaching bartenders and waiters, rickshaw, pedicab drivers and such about the Affordable Care Act, and it just blew me away about how many people just didn't know that the exchanges had even opened. And part of me thinks, gosh, is that our fault? Are we not getting that message across? What I'm hearing is, I know something happened with Obamacare. 22-year-old bartender told me this. She said, I know something happened with Obamacare. I don't know what it is. I know I'm hearing a lot more about people's opinions of it than I am the actual details. I mean, I think that's disheartening.
Jim, do you have the resources to do, at a paper like The Observer, do you have the resources to do the follow-up stories and not so much the headline stories, but really the in-depth reporting?
Well, I like to think so. We have an investigative staff, and they recently did a series on the hospital authority here in Mecklenburg County, which won all kinds of awards. But to be honest with you, the last few years haven't been kind to the newspaper industry. So we have a diminished newsroom, diminished resources, and at some point that's going to be felt, whether in stories like that or in political coverage in Raleigh. I mean, Tim is there with News 14, but a lot of newspapers, including our own, don't have the same number of people there that we've had before.
Yeah. Anybody else have a different take?
Well, I mean, it's difficult. On television, we're instant, so it's hard. I just think the spin makes it really difficult. I mean, I've told people in North Carolina, I think
spin from the source?
Washington spin has come down to North Carolina. So we spend significantly more time trying to sort through whether what they're telling us is legitimate or not, or whether they're spinning it. Not necessarily whether it's incorrect, but how they're spinning it. I mean, I spent 6 hours one day trying to answer one question about tax reform in North Carolina, and at the end of the day, I still wasn't quite sure. So how was my viewer supposed to completely understand that as well? And I'm talking to economic experts from Harvard, from Princeton, and I'm still getting these same answers. So I think that's making our job incredibly difficult. I mean, I'm not complaining about it, but I do think the viewer and the readers in the end get hurt the most.
And ask yourself how many PR professionals there are on a ratio scale, PR professionals to journalists these days. We're getting slaughtered. So that, what you just said, becomes increasingly difficult. PR people, consultants, message spinners, you got to deal with that.
That's a great point. I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, because it seems like in my experience, it's not so much that the facts are in dispute, but it's the interpretation of those facts. And that seems to me, that has to be our job. I mean, I take it as a responsibility. We don't let people say things that are not true in the story.
But Adam, good question. So you've got two aspects of that. Fact checking, but during the interview or during the dialogue, if you know something is gray area, let's just be kind and say gray area, do you go after them then?
Well, I think it depends on the venue. I think if it's a public forum, public debate, and with TV cameras rolling live and lots of public there, I think you have to. I think it's a responsibility to do that. And if not, if it's just a personal interview and they're trying to tell you to print something that's wrong, I think the best practice there is not to print it. Don't let them say something.
One of the hard parts about television is it's instant, so you can't go back and try to fix it. And in North Carolina, we've had probably the largest changeover of state government policy in I mean, maybe ever in the state. So we're taking on tax reform, education reform, HHS regulations, and to know all of that is really it's overwhelming.
We're outnumbered too in a way. Our mailboxes are flooded. Our mailboxes are flooded every day with things from the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the Republicans. But not only do you have parties and campaigns that flood you with their spin and their facts, but you have third-party groups anymore that that have proliferated.
So how do you tweeze through all that?
You just have to sort it out. I mean, it gets hard.
Yeah. Let's talk about some specific politics. In South Carolina, Governor Haley started out a little rocky, and certainly, and I say rocky this way, guys, that she was being pegged as a Tea Partier, and maybe still has a lot of that, but she seems to be reaching out to business and industry when she had shut them down in a large way. Adam, is she at risk in 2014? And Vince Sheehan said he wants that job and he's going to go after it. So what are his odds, and how much is she at risk in their leadership job?
Well, what you have to remember about this race is it is a rematch. We've seen this episode before. Senator Sheehan ran against her in 2010. She had a lot of issues then. She had questions about her money, questions about her ethics. And she came through all of those fine and beat him by 4.5 points. This time around, he feels like he is in a great position because the most recent poll we've seen, granted it's a couple of months old, shows they're basically tied after, going on a full term of Governor Haley here. And, she has had a couple of problems. Number one, Department of Revenue, an international hacker, stole the personal information of 6.4 million consumers. These people are going to have credit protection probably for the rest of their lives. And Senator Sheehan is really trying to pin that on her. And it's been interesting to see in the legislative session how the two of them jockey to try to either take the credit for making it better or shift the blame away to somebody.
Somebody said about that DOR intrusion of all of those IDs, they said it's not, and this was a security expert on this program, said it's not if you're going to get hacked, it's when you're going to get hacked. And I guess the question specifically around the South Carolina DOR issue was how they handled it post-hacking. Is that right?
Absolutely. And, the governor is part of the Budget Control Board in South Carolina, which is like this 5-member board that really runs the state.
Yeah.
They have issued an RFP for this credit monitoring protection contract that's going to run for possibly the next 4 years. Offers a $1 million insurance policy. If you do lose money, you can get that money back. Offers credit protection, all kinds of a host of things for consumers to have. And the governor's really pushing that. Likewise, Senator Sheehan, in the budget, he put in an earmark basically that sets aside a fund of about $400,000 for anybody who loses money to be reimbursed by the state. So they're both doing this, trying to take the reins here to say after the fact, look, I'm the leader here. I'm the one that's working for you to protect you. That's why you need to entrust me with this office.
You mentioned business earlier, and I think this is probably going to come up in this race. One of the really interesting aspects of 2010 was that the state Chamber of Commerce actually supported the Democratic candidate Vincent Sheehan.
At great cost to the chamber, to
absolutely.
the current administration.
And Nikki Haley's spokesperson at the time basically called the Chamber of Commerce communist or something, or socialist or something like that. Like, why would we want their endorsement? Well, they're probably going to get the endorsement. Haley's probably going to get the endorsement from the Chamber of Commerce this time. And it's because she has pitched herself as the jobs governor. Right? That's kind of her brand. Where she gets hit on the right from that, though, from libertarian types in South Carolina, is that what's the cost of all these jobs? Well, it's tax incentives, tax breaks. It's giving a lot of public giveaway to corporations to come in. Some have called them bribes, even. So, first of all, what we as reporters are going to have to do is every time she says we've created this many jobs, now we have to go and find out, go talk to the Department of Commerce, go talk to these companies directly. How many of these jobs actually are coming here? And at what cost? I mean, Boeing came down to North Charleston and we gave them how much? $1 billion?
Yeah, something like that.
The question is that worth it? Is that worth it every single time you bring in a company like Michelin, you bring in a company like, years ago it was BMW and stuff like that. So we'll see that play out as well.
Will that element be punitive enough to Haley, though, that would slow her down?
I mean, that's a message that I think Vincent Sheehan's going to have to figure out how he wants to handle it. But I see that coming more from the right. And I mean, because South Carolina is so strange and anything can happen, it's not necessarily.
Are you from South Carolina, by the way, Corey?
I'm not. I've lived there a decade.
Okay.
So I kind of feel like a Martian coming in.
Okay. Landing and trying to make out.
Even still. But there are grumblings out there that it's possible that she could get primaried from the right by a liberty movement type candidate who would just run on the perils of economic incentives and corporate socialism.
What she needs to worry about, I think, is not necessarily getting primary, but having one of these people run as a third party, independent in the
And
general.
split the vote.
Yeah.
Because if that happens, you're going to see a significant portion of her base, probably in the Low Country, where she gets a lot of her support from, go to whoever this person could be, and then it'd be a toss-up.
Looking at it from up north, I can't see the National Republican Party letting her lose. Because South Carolina is so important to 2016, and you've already seen a couple Republican governors come in, right, for her announcement. So I think they'd be behind her.
Well, and Jim, let's talk about North Carolina. I mean, there's already talk about the governor's race in North Carolina. Roy Cooper, Attorney General, has been, maybe not publicly, but speaking to people one-on-one that he wants that job. So what does that mean for what's going on? Yeah, I mean, and this is a wide-open question, but when you got, as you said, first time in 100 years that Republicans have been in charge, in as much as they have been, what does this look like?
It means that Roy Cooper must smell blood, and that the polls must be looking pretty good for him, because Roy Cooper is the Attorney General, and they've been after him for 12 years or something to think about running for governor, and he's always stepped aside. So now that he's actively thinking about it, it says that that Democrats think that McCrory is vulnerable.
I think in North Carolina, Democrats are looking for someone to rally around, a Jim Hunt type figure. Yeah. And so I think there's pressure. They saw the movement with Morrill Mondays. They're looking for a way to move that movement forward, which is a protest at the Capitol every Monday, or at the state legislature. And I think Roy Cooper, as Jim eloquently said, smells blood and sees blood and wants to go after it. And so I think there's at least going to be fundraising that's going to start very soon. I still don't think we see an announcement until early 2015, but I think it's going to be very clear.
Let me stay with you for just a second, Tim. Tom Tillis, Speaker of the House, has announced that he would like Kay Hagan's seat, U.S. Senator from North Carolina. How much does that the Senate politics, campaign politics, affect what happens in May at the next session in North Carolina?
Well, that's a big question, and particularly because he wasn't going to announce until after session, ended up doing it, and there's a lot of lawmakers that did not like that and thought it disrupted the end of the session and caused issues. So it depends on how much they want to do in the short session. They're only there from May until hopefully July. But it could have a huge impact. It would have been massive if the Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger decided to run, but he didn't. So I think it will, but it remains to be seen how much.
How risky do you think Kay Hagan is in keeping that seat?
Well, she's vulnerable because she's a Democrat in a state that went for Romney, but it depends on how bloody the Republican primary is. And you have Tillis, but you also have two conservatives that are going to split the conservative vote. You have Mark Harris, a Baptist minister from Charlotte, and a Tea Party favorite in Greg Brannon from Cary. So it depends how divisive that primary is.
We've got about 2 minutes left, and I want to talk about the ACA, and more specifically, both states have declined the federal health care exchange, or the state-run health care exchange, and in North Carolina declined to expand Medicaid on top of it. How does this pan out 3 years and beyond, Adam, that South Carolina has said no to the exchange?
Well, it depends on who you talk to. The Democrats say, we're going to reject it now, but you just wait and see. In 2 years, the system's going to be so screwed up, we're going to have to accept this money. The Republicans keep saying no because, if we do accept the money, it's going to put us on the hook for filling them. I think it was like 10% of the cost that has to be paid eventually. So it's really a battle about money in South Carolina. And I think we're not going to know the answer to that until we get another year or two down the road to see what the money looks like and what the numbers are to see if it has to be accepted.
Different take on that, Corey?
No, I think that's pretty much what's going to happen. I think that's certainly going to play a huge role in the 2014 governor's race. You're going to see, I think, just like we did in 2010, ads from Haley's campaign calling Vincent Shaheen an Obama liberal in our own backyard because he's for expanding Medicaid. Therefore, he's for Obamacare. Therefore, he's just like Obama.
And not just
State
that,
like South Carolina doesn't look very good.
Does it look any different in North Carolina that way?
Well, I mean, pressure's mounting as other Republican governors accept the expansion, and I think some people think Governor McCrory would. He said he wants to look at it if they fix Medicaid in the state. That's a pretty tall order, I think most people would think, and what the definition of fixed is.
Yeah, that's going to have to be the last word. Guys, thank you. Thanks for your open and honest opinions here. We appreciate it. Please come back. We hope you all come back.
Thanks for having us.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for
Thank you.
traveling. Thanks for walking down the street, Jim. Good to have you on the program. Thank you for watching our program. A couple reminders. If you have comments, don't say this nearly enough, so I want to say it now. If you have comments or questions or suggestions, or you'd like to watch this program, you can online. It's carolinabusinessreview.org. One long word, carolinabusinessreview.org. We love to hear your comments. Thank you again for watching and supporting this program. Until next week, I'm Chris Woody, and we hope your business and your politics are certainly better than they have been. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.